My name is Sherry. Standing in the conference room, I watched as Brenda's face paled like a fading watercolor, and Victor's hands trembled uncontrollably. Derek sat there, frozen, his mouth agape in shock. The silence was deafening, filled with the weight of their guilt and my long-awaited justice. It all started years ago. I was placed in a foster home in Denver, Colorado, after my biological parents died in a tragic plane crash when I was 8. I don't remember much of that day, just the overwhelming sense of loss and the cold hands of the social worker as she handed me a small bag with my few belongings. The Johnsons took me in. Mr. Johnson, 55, was a shrewd car dealership owner. His business, Johnson Auto Sales, had been struggling for years, constantly on the verge of bankruptcy. He was a man who always seemed to be on the edge, his eyes filled with desperation as he tried to keep his failing business afloat. Mrs. Johnson, 53, was a woman obsessed with appearances. She volunteered at the local charity events, always with a perfect smile on her face, but she never once showed any real affection towards me. Their son, Jake, 27, was a lazy and aimless young man. He bounced from one failed venture to another, never taking responsibility for his actions. But then there was Grandpa Henry. He was 82 when he passed away, and he was the only one in that family who truly cared about me. He ran a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of Denver for over 30 years. He built it from the ground up, with nothing but hard work and determination. He taught me everything I know about cars, from changing a tire to fixing an engine. More importantly, he taught me about integrity and the importance of seeing people for who they really are. Sherry, people show you their true colors, he'd say. Believe them. I took his words to heart. I became a cybersecurity analyst through self-study, scholarships, and online courses. I moved out of the Johnsons' house at 20 and built my own life. When Grandpa Henry's health started to decline 3 years ago, I was the one who took care of his online affairs, set up his laptop, and managed his medical appointments. He trusted me so much that he gave me power of attorney and, a week before he died, he gave me his old pocket watch. Keep it wound, Sherry, he said. It stops when you forget. The night before the will reading, I was sitting at my kitchen table, going through Grandpa Henry's financial records. I noticed a pattern that I'd first seen 6 weeks ago. Every 2 weeks, on a Thursday, a large sum of money was being transferred from his primary checking account to an account registered under the name E. Thompson. I did some digging and found out that this account was opened at a different bank in Denver, 16 months after Mrs. Johnson was given access to help with Grandpa's bills. Over the past 3 years, there had been 76 transactions, totaling $235,000. I knew I should have reported it right away, but Grandpa was dying. I couldn't bear the thought of him spending his last days dealing with family drama over money. So, I decided to wait. I documented every transaction, saved screenshots, and created a detailed timeline spreadsheet. I stored everything on an encrypted drive, a habit from my cyber security work. The next morning, as I was walking to my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex, a man stepped out from behind a large dumpster. He was wearing a tattered jacket and had a week's worth of stubble on his face. His eyes, though, were sharp and focused. "Miss Sherry," he said. "Don't take that car." I stopped in my tracks. I looked at him, then down at the ground under my car's front axle. There was a pool of brake fluid on the asphalt, like a dark stain of betrayal. I crouched down and touched the fluid. It was still wet, and it had that distinct chemical smell of a purposeful sabotage. The man introduced himself as Tom, 65. He had worked at Grandpa Henry's repair shop for 20 years until it closed. After that, his wife got sick and he lost everything to medical bills. When Mrs. Johnson took over Grandpa's finances, the monthly checks he used to receive stopped. He'd been sleeping in his car behind my apartment building for the past 3 months. Grandpa had asked him to look out for me. Tom told me that around 2:30 a.m. He saw a white van pull into the parking lot. A man got out, crawled under my car with a flashlight and a tool, and stayed there for about 25 minutes. He recognized the van as Jake's. Most people would have called the police right away, but I knew that if I did, it would only expose the brake line cutting and not the financial fraud. I needed to expose both at the same time. So, I called my friend, Mike, a licensed private investigator. I told him what had happened and what I needed him to do. He agreed to help me. Mike drove to my apartment, took pictures of the cut brake lines from every angle, and arranged for a mechanic to do a sworn inspection report. Then, he pushed my car into a ditch on the road I usually took to the lawyer's office. By 9 a.m. The local news was reporting a single vehicle accident, and the driver was unaccounted for. I went to a motel a few miles away and started monitoring the Johnsons' reactions. Mike parked across from their house and used a telephoto lens to watch them. Around 11 a.m. I saw through Mike's photos that no one in the Johnson house called the police or went to the accident scene. Mrs. Johnson made a phone call, paced around the kitchen for a few minutes, and then sat down at the table, looking calm. Mr. Johnson sat in the dining room, his head in his hands. Jake went to the garage, came back with a black trash bag, tossed it into the van, and drove off. He returned 35 minutes later without the bag. From my motel room, I accessed the Johnson family's phone plan online. I still had the login credentials from when I managed Grandpa's affairs. At 11:45 a.m. Jake sent a text to Mrs. Johnson saying, "It's done." Mrs. Johnson replied, "Thank God. Now go to the lawyers." I was filled with a mix of anger and determination. I sat in that motel room, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, and decided to fight back. I opened a new folder on my encrypted drive and started organizing all the evidence, the financial timeline, the surveillance photos, the brake line evidence, and the text logs. The will reading was postponed when the lawyer, Miss Anderson, heard about the accident. She tried to call me, but I'd switched to a burner phone. She then called Mike, who was listed as my emergency contact. He patched her through to me on a conference call. Ms. Anderson told me something that changed everything. 2 months before he died, Grandpa Henry had come to her office. He was in a wheelchair, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He told her that he'd made a mistake trusting certain people and that he'd changed the executor of his will from Mr. Johnson to me. He also left a sealed letter that could only be opened if I was present at the will reading. Back at the motel, I went into full forensic mode. I traced the money from Grandpa's account to the E. Thompson account and then to 3 different destinations. $130,000 went directly to pay off the outstanding debt at Johnson Auto Sales. $45,000 was used to pay off Jake's credit card bills, which were filled with purchases for expensive electronics and restaurant meals. $60,000 was put as a down payment on a beach house in Florida, registered in Mrs. Johnson's name. Mike called me in the afternoon with some updates. He'd checked the security footage from my apartment complex. Jake's white van entered the parking lot at 2:15 a.m. and left at 2:40 a.m. He also went to the auto parts store near Jake's house. Jake had bought a brake line cutting tool 2 days before the sabotage, and he'd paid with his credit card. The mechanic who inspected my car submitted a sworn statement saying that both front brake lines had been deliberately cut with a sharp tool. I called Detective Lisa at the Denver Police Department. I'd worked with her on a previous case, and she knew I was thorough. I laid out all the evidence for her. She reviewed the files and said that there was enough for warrants. The financial trail alone was considered elder financial exploitation, a Class B felony in Colorado, and the brake line cutting supported attempted first-degree murder. We planned to serve the warrants at the rescheduled will reading. I spent the rest of the day building a comprehensive forensic report, divided into 6 sections: an executive summary, a financial forensic timeline, forgery evidence, shell entity documentation, attempted murder evidence, and behavioral evidence. The night before the rescheduled reading, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, holding Grandpa's pocket watch. I remembered the times he'd taught me to wind it, 40 turns, no more. I thought about his words, about how machines are honest, but people hide their broken parts. I knew that he'd known what was going on, and he'd trusted me to set things right. The next morning, I dressed in a professional suit, put the pocket watch in my inner pocket, and packed my briefcase with all the evidence. Tom was waiting for me in the motel parking lot. He'd shaved and was wearing Grandpa's old flannel shirt. "Grandpa Henry asked me to watch out for you," he said. "I'm glad I could help." We drove to Ms. Anderson's office. When we arrived, I saw the Johnsons' cars parked in the lot. Mrs. Johnson's SUV was parked close to the entrance. Mr. Johnson's sedan was haphazardly parked across 2 spots, and Jake's white van was backed into a corner. I climbed the stairs to the conference room. Through the glass panel of the door, I could see them sitting around the table. Mrs. Johnson was checking her phone. Mr. Johnson was staring blankly at the table, and Jake was bouncing his leg nervously. Ms. Anderson was sitting at the head of the table, waiting. I opened the door and walked in. The sound of the latch closing behind me echoed through the room. The Johnsons looked up, their faces filled with shock. Mrs. Johnson's phone slipped from her fingers and hit the table with a thud. Mr. Johnson's hands trembled, and Jake froze mid-bounce. Ms. Anderson began to read the will. Grandpa Henry's estate, including his house, savings, and the remains of the repair shop business, was worth approximately $520,000 after debts and taxes. It was to be divided equally among Mr. Johnson, Jake, and me, each getting about $173,333. I watched as the Johnsons' initial shock turned to relief. They'd expected Grandpa to cut them out, but here they were, getting an equal share. Little did they know that their relief was short-lived. Ms. Anderson then placed a sealed envelope on the table. "Grandpa Henry left a personal letter to be read aloud," she said. "It can only be opened if Sherry is present." Mrs. Johnson's relief curdled into fear. She glanced at Mr. Johnson, who avoided her eyes. Ms. Anderson broke the seal and read the letter. "Sherry, I knew what was going on. I watched my money disappear for 3 years, but I wanted to see if any of you would come clean. None of you did. I changed the executor to you because I knew you'd do the right thing." I opened my folder and slid the forensic report to the center of the table. "Grandpa was right, and I have the proof," I said. I walked them through the evidence, step by step. Mrs. Johnson tried to deny everything, saying that she was just helping Grandpa manage his bills. But I pointed out the shell account and the fact that I was now the executor of the estate. I placed the forged bank withdrawal slip next to an authenticated sample of Grandpa's signature. "This is not Grandpa's signature," I said. "Someone forged his name." Mr. Johnson's hands began to shake as he recognized his own handwriting. I then presented the evidence of the brake line cutting, the security camera footage, the auto parts store receipt, and the mechanic's sworn statement. Jake panicked and tried to blame his mother. "You said there were no cameras," he shouted. Mrs. Johnson snapped, "I told you to use cash." In that moment, the truth came out. Mr. Johnson admitted that he knew about the money stealing but didn't know about the attempted murder. I told him that he was still responsible for forging Grandpa's signature on the loan agreement to save his failing business. Ms. Anderson informed them that under Colorado law, elder financial exploitation was a serious crime, and a beneficiary who participated in fraud against the decedent could forfeit their inheritance. I reached into my pocket and took out Grandpa's pocket watch. I set it on the table between the report and the break line photographs. "Grandpa gave me this watch," I said. "He told me to keep it wound. You forgot that I was the one he trusted." I then asked Miss Anderson to read the executor designation. She opened the document and announced that I was the sole executor of Grandpa's estate, with full authority to manage, distribute, and pursue civil recovery claims against any beneficiary who had committed fraud. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Detective Lisa. Now. A few seconds later, we heard footsteps on the stairs. 2 uniformed officers and Detective Lisa entered the room. "Jake Johnson, you are under arrest for attempted first-degree murder," Detective Lisa said. Jake lunged from his chair, but an officer quickly stopped him. "Mrs. Johnson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and elder financial exploitation." Mrs. Johnson stood up straight, but her eyes were filled with fear. Mr. Johnson was informed that the district attorney's office would contact him regarding the financial fraud charges. As the officers led Mrs. Johnson out of the room, she passed Tom in the lobby. She stopped and stared at him. "You did this," she said. Tom looked at her calmly. "No, ma'am. You did." The conference room was left almost empty. Ms. Anderson handed me the sealed letter from Grandpa. I opened it and read his words again. "Sherry, I'm sorry I couldn't fight harder. But I knew you'd figure it out. Love, Grandpa Henry." I signed the executive paperwork and looked at Ms. Anderson. "It's handled," I said. The legal process moved forward. Mrs. Johnson was denied bail and held at the Denver County Detention Facility. Jake was charged with attempted first-degree murder, and his bail was set at $480,000, which he couldn't afford. Mr. Johnson took a plea deal, agreeing to full restitution of the forged $340,000 loan and forfeiting his inheritance. Johnson Auto Sales closed, and the inventory was auctioned. The beach house in Florida was sold, and the proceeds were returned to the estate. The lien on Grandpa's house, based on the forged consent, was voided. I distributed the estate according to Grandpa's wishes. I kept my 1/3 share, and Mr. Johnson's forfeited share went to local community programs that Grandpa had supported, like the Vocational Training Center and the after-school program at the local library. I offered Tom a job as the maintenance man at the property where I was setting up a small cyber security consulting office. He accepted, and the apartment above the garage became his first stable home in years. 2 months later, I was sitting at Grandpa's kitchen table, working on a client project. The garage outside had a new sign that read cybersecurity, digital forensics, and risk assessment. Through the window, I could see Tom mending the fence. He was whistling a tune that I'm sure Grandpa would have recognized. Grandpa's pocket watch sat on the table next to my laptop. I wound it every morning, just as he'd taught me. Sometimes, for a brief moment, I'd forget that he was gone. The watch kept his time, a constant reminder of his love and trust. Family isn't about blood or adoption papers. It's about the people who stand by you, who believe in you, and who love you unconditionally. That's my story, a story of betrayal and redemption, and a reminder to always look out for those who truly have your back.